Welcome to Advanced Rulemaking for Autoelevate. So today's focus will be creating some rules, doing some advanced configuration of those rules, and hopefully we'll get a better understanding of how the rules work, what's the best way to do them. There's lots of different scenarios and how you might put rules together. And it really just depends on the software, what you're trying to accomplish, what you want to allow, and what you don't want to allow. So let's jump right into it, and we're going to start with making rules from events. So we're going to go to our events. Hopefully you're all following along. And while we're here, a little bit of a quick tutorial. We're going to show you how to make some of your own views using the grid views. So the first thing everybody can do is to create a grid view. Right now, if you have nothing selected up there, if your screen looks just like mine and this is sort of the way you've been using it, this is how you make a grid view. So over here, grab any column header you want. In this scenario, the two views we're going to create are vendor and publisher. And we're going to show you what those look like. So let's start with that. So we're going to go vendor, drag it up here into this header section. You can see where it looks like a little shadow there, and drop it. And you can see now we're organized by vendor. So I can see which vendors are out there, and I can see which computers are basically using software from those vendors that have that need elevation. But I also it would be helpful to know, well, what software is asking for elevation as well. So grab name, find name in your column headers there. Yours might look a little different than mine. Drag it up there, put it right there, and then now you're going to see who the vendor is, what the name of the software is, and then down here you're going to see which computers are asking to elevate that particular software. When you're happy and you want to save it, just click on Unsave Grid View and then click Save Grid View. If you've made some grid views, some of your other ones will already be there. And then you can switch back and forth between them. But this is the first view. I like to call this one vendor or vendor name, whatever works best for you. But this is the first view that we're going to look at. And this is a very common way to look at rules in or events in Autoelevate for building rules. Now, another view that I want to create, in addition to this one, a lot of times when we're doing approvals, we're going to do them based on the publisher certificate. And so what we want to find out is there more than one certificate for this particular vendor? Because sometimes they'll publish software under different certificates, or in a lot of cases, if we have to have multiple versions of something like QuickBooks, you may have multiple digital certificates, and so you may want to create rules using those. In order to do that, let's roll over here, kind of scroll off to the right a bit, find publisher thumbprint, bring that over here, put it between vendor and name, just like that, and drop it. Come over here, unsave grid view, save grid view, and call it, this is what I named mine. Again, really, it's whatever works best for you. Now that we've got that information, we can now see who the vendor is, how many thumbprints are out there. These thumbprints are attached to the digital certificates that they use to code sign their software. These are good for about every 2 years, so they do rotate quite frequently. It's not uncommon to see multiple thumbprints. And this is your first decision point. If I'm going to make a approval based off of a publisher thumbprint, for example, or a digital cert, then and let's say there's multiples, and we'll use an example like Oracle down here. So there's two of them. Do I want to make two rules, one for each thumbprint? Now, here's a little just how the industry works kind of stuff. So these thumbprints, there are also subject elements that go along with these particular certificates. So for example, if I were to grab this right here and put it right there, and we go back and we look at the same Oracle information, now I can see all of the subject elements for those particular thumbprints. This is just a great way to make reports. So depending on what you're looking for and how you want to see it, it's a fantastic way to do that. But we want to get to the root of when I build a rule and I start making that rule, I want to have all of the information at my fingertips. So when I'm making the rule, I make the best rule possible. So in this case, if you wanted to make two rules, one for each thumbprint, absolutely acceptable. Thumbprints are much, much harder to create or duplicate or to make it look the same. These obviously subject elements are a little bit easier to sort of mirror or duplicate in a fake certificate. The thumbprints are a little bit harder. So in this scenario, it's really just your choice, your level of risk acceptance, and how you want to do that. So in this scenario, maybe I'll make two rules, one for each one for this one for this one. And you would do that simply by selecting any computer, any event, just pick one. And as soon as you do that, the action button will light up and then you can make a rule for it. If you want to do one rule that would cover both of these thumbprints, right? So I just want to make one rule for Oracle that covered any thumbprint they might have. In that scenario, you might want to use then the subject elements between the two that are the same. So if we do a quick comparison, we can see that Oracle, Oracle, software, Oracle, Redwood City, California, so on and so forth, right? So I might go, yeah, maybe I'll just do this based on this information. And that way I can just make one rule and be done with it. Again, this is entirely up to you. These are a little more secure. These are a little less secure. This is a little less administrative work later on. This is just a little bit more. So just giving you the different options. Now, when we go to make a rule, we just select the event that we want to make a rule from and say, go ahead and create rule. So in this case, we've got, let's see what we've got selected here. And you can see when we clear all these out, right, and we get a list of all of our events. So now I want to go ahead and I'm going to make a rule for, let's use Notepad++. It's a pretty common one that we do see a lot of. So I think this will be a good one for everybody. So let's start with that one. So we're going to go this one right here. Notepad++, and it was just my system that asked for it. So I'm going to go ahead and select that item. One item is selected. Now, if you select one item, which is the way you kind of do this, the best way to make rules is to sort your list and then go down your list. Pick a day. Doesn't matter when. Just do your auditing for a little bit. Get a bunch of events in here, as many as you can. The more agents you put out there, the more events you're going to collect, the better the first pass of rules is going to be. So when we're doing these, what we want to look at is, okay, these are all the events I got in the system. I'm going to go through these one by one, and I'm going to go ahead and either decide, do I need a rule? Do I not need a rule? And if I don't, I can close it up and skip it and move on to the next one. I want to make a rule out of this one. And then we're just going to work our way through the list. That way, you're never going to get all the rules in one go, or in multiple goes for that matter, because there's just way too many things that can hit UAC. So what you want to do is sort of get a foundation or a baseline rule set done. And then once you do that, put the computers in live mode. Whatever you didn't get in your baseline, you're going to see a live request come in for. You can build rules from them from a live request. And that way you know exactly what you missed. Now, the more rules you get done in the first go and the better your baseline is, obviously, you're not going to get that many requests. Okay, so let's make a rule. So if you do more than one selection, we are going to make what's called a quick rule. So you see I have two items selected. If you go convert rule, so if you see this screen and you're like, uh-oh, I don't know what to do with this, you have more than one event selected. So in this case, if you were trying to make multiple events, when you do it this way, Autoelevate will automatically build rules based on the MD5 or SHA-256 hash. Okay, you can change this later. You can edit the rules later to make them what you want. But if you make quick rules, either from the event screen like this, or from a request where you say approve, say all company or location or computer, that's going to make a rule, and it's going to make it based on the MD5 or SHA-256 hash. So here, don't want to do that just yet. So we're going to cancel that. I'm going to unselect here, and so I've got my list. I've already been through, and this is the first one I want to start with. So that's the one I want. Now let's go Actions, Convert to Rule. At the very top of the screen, this is the UAC event detail. So what's asking for elevation? UAC works on the premise of privilege is granted to what privilege was requested for. So in this case, this is the thing that is asking for elevation. And now what I have to decide is, do I want to give this elevation or do I want to deny it its ability to elevate? And we do that by with some ID criteria. Now, ideally, you can think about it this way. Think of the left side of this as your if statement and the right side of this as the then statement. So if I were to simply leave this be as it was, then what we would be saying is this, and I do always recommend like try to say these. Sometimes it helps people to sort of say it out loud so that they get the logic of what's happening. If the file hash is this hash, then approve admin elevation, and then you want to choose your level. All company, whole company, and so on. Now you can nest rules, so that's important to note. Nesting rules means I can create, or some people might say, well, I have a duplicate rule, or maybe I have a conflicting rule. You can make a rule at all companies that says this is approved, and then I can go make another rule that says denied at the particular company level and say, well, these folks, they don't want to do it. And so that would work just fine. And so the hierarchy goes like this. Computer rules can override location rules, which can override whole company rules, and then they can override your globals. So I can make a global rule that says this is approved for everybody, and then go make another rule that says, well, except this company, we're going to deny it. Okay, and that logic would work perfectly fine. The other thing that's important to understand when you're making rules is your elevation type. So basically, this is contextual. So am I handing the admin token over to this process as an over-the-shoulder administrator? And I know sometimes that's terminology that some of us vendors might use, but think of it this way. If you've logged into somebody's computer, you've typed your admin account into UAC and clicked OK, that's an over-the-shoulder admin. You're not passing the admin token as that person who's logged into the machine. Sometimes, some software in some scenarios, you need to do that, or things may not work properly. Think of it this way. If I'm connecting to a share drive to install a program, I would want to use a user elevation in that scenario because our account doesn't have any authority in their domain. So, but the user who's using it, their account has permissions to that share, for example. Or if you're doing like client server stuff, AutoCAD, that's another one that's kind of, it can be finicky between user and admin elevations. Autodesk or Revit especially, user elevation. When you're installing Revit, then you want to be logged in as a user and use user elevation to install that because that's the only person that will be able to update it. And no amount of other credentials is going to work with that program. It's just how it's written. So there are just those sort of sneaky situations where you want to, use user elevation. But for the most part, we'll call it 8 times out of 10, admin elevation is going to work just fine. And you've all seen this from experience. When you log in and put your credentials in and everything works, admin elevation then. Now, let's look at some of the file criteria and see how is it possible to manipulate this rule to maybe open my scope a little bit, expand my approval range a little bit. Maybe I don't necessarily care about individual file hashes. In some cases, those won't work. So the new Office 365 installer changes the hash every time somebody downloads it. So if you made a hash-based rule like this one, it wouldn't work. It would only work for the one company and the one person who installed it using that particular hash. So again, some of the stuff is just research. You can also check the hash. So if I click right there on the link, it's going to take me to virus totals and I can see if this thing has any problems. So is this like have a problem somewhere else that I need to be worried about? What does the community say? It's a great place to figure out what these things do if you're not sure, because you'll see some weird stuff hitting UAC. It's kind of weird. So, and sometimes you just may not know what it is or what it does. And this is a great place to go figure that out. Once we validate that the file is good, though, I always tell people if you let bad things in, bad things could happen. If you don't let bad things in, if you check and validate and make sure it is legitimate, right? There's no reason for this installer to start kicking off PowerShell and installing ransomware. It's not a compromised file. So it's a good file. It's okay. It's not going to do bad things. So now let's open our approval a little bit and see some different ways we could potentially handle how we might want to do this particular approval. So the first scenario is simply the one that we've got is I only want this file to install. And that's it. No other version, no other anything, only this file. If that is your need, then file hash is perfect. That's the way you want to do it. Now let's say we want to expand our scope a little bit. Yeah, I don't care what they install from this vendor, right? Then you could do a vendor-based approval. I don't know how much other software this vendor has, but let's say that this is the only thing that they do. And you don't care about the version. Another example of that would be like Intuit. So Intuit has tax and accounting software. So yeah, that's probably fine. I don't really care if they install the tax and accounting pieces. If they want to use Tax Manager, they got to update QuickBooks. It doesn't really matter. I'm fine with that if that's okay. Now, all of these things that we're talking about for you are just going to be simply acceptable levels of risk. So if you feel comfortable with it, that's fine. I'm not saying it's good, it's bad. I'm just giving you some general recommendations and how you might format a rule to behave the way you want and expect it to behave. So in this situation, this would be allowing a vendor. I'm just allowing Notepad++, and it's specifically for software signed with this digital thumbprint, which in this case expires in 2025. So now that's how you would do a publisher approval, right? Now, if I have multiple publishers, like we saw with Oracle in the events list earlier, then you might want to do each one. So I would have two rules, one for publisher thumbprint 1 and publisher thumbprint 2. Or you could choose to do the subject elements and you could simply select the ones you wanted. So I know that in many cases, these ones right here tend to not change. If you see one in here called OU, that one does tend to change a little bit. So a lot of times we can say, you know what, I'm just going to match all the subject elements. It's a little less secure than cert hash, but if you have a lot of certificates from a vendor like AnyDesk or Autodesk, yeah, then this might be the easier way to go about it. So in this case, I like certificate hash for what I'm doing here. So I'm going to do a cert hash, but I'm not going to give them necessarily carte blanche access to elevate anything from the Notepad++ vendor, okay? And in that situation, then what I'm going to do is I am going to limit the scope of this approval by adding some additional file attributes. So I said before, think of the left side as the if section, the right side as the then section. Well, in between that would be the ands. So anytime you select these boxes, they're always going to be and. So if I want to limit my scope, let's say that Notepad++ had other products that they might sell or have digitally signed. So I might limit my scope. This would also be a good example using product name for Microsoft. You never want to do a full-on publisher approval by itself for Microsoft certificates. It opens the door to way too much software and way too many things that can be elevated. And if they're savvy, that can cause a lot of problems, and we don't want to do that. So using product name is a great way to limit the scope. So in this case, let's read this aloud. If the product name is Notepad++ and the publisher is Notepad++ and the certificate hash is this, then we will do an admin approval for the whole company, right? Or we'll just say this is all companies because a lot of people might use this software. Now, I also want to add a friendly name, and here's why friendly name is going to be important. So when we do a quick rule, so if you do a quick rule from a request, or you multi-select events and you do a quick rule, remember, it's always going to be based on just the file hash, and we're not going to fill out the friendly name. So if you see a bunch of rules in the rule list that don't have a name, you know you need to check those so that they do what you want them to do. And once they do, put in something that tells you what that rule does. Now, I like using something like approve or deny so that I know when I look at it that that's kind of like two meanings for approval. One, I approve this rule, and two, this rule is an approval rule. And so I know that I've reviewed this. And so in this case, I'm going to use my Notepad++ one here and say approved Notepad++ using the publisher certificate expires 2025. Now this is just my nomenclature. It's what makes sense in my head, but again, whatever makes sense to you folks, just go ahead and use that. Whatever's going to be easy for everybody to agree on. Now, let's think of just a little bit about what's happening now. So we're allowing Notepad++, if this product is legit and it's signed by this vendor, we're going to allow it to elevate. Now, what that means is once this product is installed, this approval will also apply after the product's installation. So I could go into Notepad++, for example, right click, say run as admin. This rule would allow that. Now, if you know Notepad++, you know you can open other programs with that. So is that something I want to do? So if I know that I can open another program like PowerShell or something like that, and it would run as administrator, that may not be something I want to let happen. But I still want to let them install the program. So here's another way you can configure a rule. So I'm going to add an additional criteria. Now, in a lot of cases, this kind of a rule that we've set up right here is probably going to be just fine. If we were to think of like QuickBooks, for example, I don't care if they install QuickBooks or Tax Manager, and I don't care if they elevate it because they have to update it. So in that situation, this type of configured rule would work perfectly. For Notepad++, which I know can open other programs, I want to add a little bit more to this rule to make sure that it's doing exactly what I want. So we're going to logic this out a little bit. So now I'm going to add this. And what this is saying is, okay, if it's Notepad++ and the product and the file name is that file name you see there, and the publisher is there, then approve that, okay? And that would limit me now to just the installer. So you can install this version of Notepad++ and it'll elevate, but because the installer name, that's why I'm using file name, the file name for the installer is different than the program name once it's installed. So the program name, once you install it, is notepad++.exe. And so that doesn't match. But then you go, but wait, there's a lot of versions of this. I could be 8.5, and they do have them too. You can download 8.54, 8.56, 8.55, like whatever. And there's x64, there's 32-bit, 64-bit. So there's a lot of different versions of this. So what I can do then is I can start to use some wildcards. So here's an example of where you might put some wildcards. So in this case, I'm going to take the middle of this sort of out of here, and I'm going to put a little asterisk in there. And I don't really care about that either. I don't care which version you're using. Let's do that. Now, let's read the rule again. If the product is Notepad++ and the file name, basically now that I've got wildcards in here, and the file name contains npp and installer.exe in that order, whatever might fall in between, as long as it's in that order and it contains that text, then it'll match. And the vendor matches and the cert hash matches, then we'll approve an admin elevation for all companies. So that's how that works. So this is going from just doing publisher, which is a very open approval, and then we went down to using publisher and product name, little more narrowed approval, great for things like QuickBooks and AnyDesk and stuff like that, to an even narrower approval to saying, okay, well, you really just installer for this company and not anything else. And since we kind of can see their naming convention, it's pretty safe for us to make some suggestions on how we might use some wildcards to allow that software to install, but not let the software itself elevate. So these are just some of the different scenarios that you might run into, how you might want to design some of the rules, and the way you might want to put some of those rules together and use just a little bit of logic there to kind of noodle out, if you will, how do I want this to behave? And if I do this, is there a scenario outside of what I'm just thinking about that may be valid, right? Just a lot of this is just basic Windows security and understanding how UAC works and then just doing a little bit of logic and matching so we can say, yep, this is allowed, but only in this condition, or no, it's not allowed, and we're going to go ahead and deny it flat out. So with that, thank you for taking some time. Hopefully this was helpful, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you so much.